Okay, so we should now be recording, and I will move my slides on. So good afternoon, everybody. Wonderful to see such a great number of people at the market engagement event. A few housekeeping bits. We've already said keep microphones and videos off, and we've said about the recording. Please post questions in the chat. We won't be answering them in this session, but we will be answering them through a frequently asked questions document that will be uploaded onto the website, and I've already put the website in the chat. So the West of England Combined Authority Community Support Fund, there is the link, but if you type that in Google, it will take you to that page anyway. And that document will be there. There isn't an FAQ document uploaded at the moment because we're going to respond to your questions today and go back to the last call, and if there's anything kind of quite common, we'll put those in there. Yeah. If you are looking for partnerships, which would be fantastic, we're definitely looking for partnerships. So if you are looking for those, do feel free to share details if you're really clear what you're looking for. You have got quite a fantastic group of providers here, so do feel free to use that chat as a sort of open networking opportunity during this call. There's a face-to-face networking opportunity that we are arranging at Eastern Community Centre from 10 to 11:30, and on our website, which is the same link I've just put in the chat before, you'll be able to sign up to that on Eventbrite. There's a maximum of 60, I think, but we're nowhere near that, so we welcome anybody here who would like to come along to that. That's a real place where we're just facilitating. It's a very open event, so anybody can come along, and we will just try and facilitate people who have different ways they want to engage with this fund. You don't have to be wanting to be a lead delivery partner. You might want to be a subcontractor, or just a wider partnership member, or actually somebody who is a referral route for these participants, either onto or off of the programme. So we will facilitate some of that on that hour and a half on that day. Just to say, that event is probably not about talking about this fund. We'll refer you back to this recording. Today is we're going to go through the Community Support Fund's aims and objectives. We're going to talk to you about the importance of having some evidence, particularly around your target groups, and we'll talk to you about everything you would probably like to know about the fund in terms of how much we've got left, the timeline, the documentation required, the way we're going to score, the process, how long the programme needs to run for, some hints and tips on what we've seen on high scoring questions from the first round, and that sort of thing. So hopefully that's not a surprise to anybody what we're covering. And I will just introduce you to Maria and Jessie, who are here. So Maria is our Community Support Fund Officer. Maria, do you want to give us a wave?
Hi.
And Jessie Agnew is our Regional Outreach Officer. Jessie, do you want to give us
Hi,
a wave?
everyone. Hi there.
There we go. They probably won't be talking much today unless I do have one of those coughing fits and they need to take over. But they're here so that you can see their faces and recognise the whole project team. There is just the three of us. Okie doke, so I'll move on. The Community Support Fund comes out of the West of England Combined Authorities Recovery Initiative. It was originally a £1.5 million pot. Do not get this confused with the UK Community Renewal Fund or the UK Shared Prosperity Fund or any other fund. We know they will have very similar acronyms, so apologies. This is the second funding round. We're making, it's just over actually, I think the specifics is 512k available. And the initial 13 projects have only just initiated in April, but they're a fantastic bunch of projects, and I would encourage everybody here, and some of them will be on the call, because existing partners can also apply. We'll talk about that more later, but I'd encourage everybody to have a look on the website and have a good look at those projects that we've already funded. We're really proud of them, and we're really excited for them to be getting going. There are different grant sizes available for this fund, as there were in the first call. So we've got small grants between 1 and 10, medium between 10 and 50, and large between 50 and 100. And just do be careful, it does depend on the type of application form you fill in, and there's some slightly different requirements around due diligence and match for those different size grants. So do read all of the application paperwork really carefully to understand what you need to do for the size of grant that you are applying for. This programme at its heart, it's an employment and skills initiative. So we're supporting those disproportionately affected by COVID within our local communities, responding to very, very local need and local issues. And we want those individuals that we engage with to start taking steps towards existing employment and skills initiatives, and that includes volunteering opportunities. We will want applicants to carefully select their target groups and really understand those specific and nuanced needs that they have in their local area. And we will be asking applicants that you show some evidence of that need. And we are looking for activity which will improve areas of social value. So if you like, you could say the employment and skills activity could, in some activities, be by stealth, because your activity might actually be about strengthening communities and social cohesion, improving health and well-being for individuals, increasing financial inclusion and resilience, and increasing pride in place and environmental awareness. And actually what we've seen from Call One projects is many of our partners, our initial delivery partners, are actually addressing several of those areas at once or sequentially based on the needs of their target groups. Funding will be awarded to voluntary and community not-for-profit sector organisations, but partnerships will be vital. And it doesn't just have to be community and voluntary groups within your consortia partners. A voluntary and community groups needs to be the lead organisation, but you can have other organisations as consortia partners, including subcontractors, and bring in that expertise that you need to deliver your programme. Positive economic outcomes will be measured using the parts that we like of the hacked social value measurements. That, if you haven't come across them before, they've traditionally been used by housing associations. We are using them as a way to try and measure our social value activity, and we're doing it as a bit of a pilot. So we're trying to understand at the end of our programme if we can put a bit of an indirect economic benefit to the activity that we've carried out within our local communities. It's not perfect. We're finding as we're starting that pilot, we don't like everything about it. So we're trying to take the best bits, and we're also trying to keep it quite light touch for the sorts of groups that you are, and for the sort of administration that we know is appropriate for these groups. You do not have to be aware of the hacked social value measures or go and research it to any level to apply for the fund. So just to be clear. We'll also be trialling digital badging. We've just started a partnership with Badge Nation, and that's a way to recognise achievement of the participants in our programme in engaging with you and taking part in your programmes. If you haven't heard of digital badging, it's probably what it says on the tin. It's a way of recognising achievement for non-formal accreditation. So it might be that you can digital badge when somebody has taken part in an entrepreneurial activity or some gardening or a cooking activity, and it will recognise the skills and the attributes that they've used during that programme. They're really, really flexible, so we're looking at ways where us as the combined authority or some of our bigger delivery partners involved in this programme might develop some badges, and then some of our smaller organisations or people who feel they haven't got the time to develop their own can pick and choose which one's most appropriate, tweak them if you like. So there's lots of flexibility around what we can do. We're also really hoping with that digital badging that some of our progression routes will be recognised. So we have big visions of some of our, say, colleges or DWP programmes potentially digital badging up either their activity, that might be the next step, or at least recognising that a participant is ready for their stage of employability work once they've gained their digital badging through this activity. So it's a pilot, we're testing and learning, but we would like you to be involved as part of this fund. So objectives and benefits. It's really difficult, this first one around the HAT social value measures. We said we're going to use them, but until you understand a little bit about it, this first one doesn't really make any sense. But it's about participants making a marked difference between where they were at the start of a programme at answering a specific question that's based around social value, and answering it different at the end and making a progression. It's nothing to worry about. We've had to stick a number on that one because we need some clear kind of KPIs around how we're using the social values measures. We've never used them before as a combined authority, so I'm not saying it's completely plucked out of the air. We've had several conversations to get to that 70%, but us ourselves don't know if it's achievable. So for that first 70%, I really wouldn't worry about it too much. It's something that we can work on with you, in partnership with you. What is important, I think, in applications is to understand that you would be happy to engage with the HAT social value measures, and potentially in the questions around evaluation, you talk about how you might support for those HAT social value questions to be answered at the beginning and the end of the programme. We want to improve employment and skills pathways for over 1,000 residents through this programme. That is the programme as a whole, so that includes the initial 13 projects, and we're not far away from that. So again, I'm not too worried about, we're not under on our participant numbers, but we will be looking in this round for you know, a good another number of participants, but we know we're going to meet that, so we'll probably be over 1,000 residents. And we talked about that social value activity on the first slide, so I won't go through those themes, but just to say activity through this fund can deliver several aspects of those social value themes. We want 100% of individuals to be directed towards some form of employability skills training and/or education opportunity, and that should say volunteering as well, as should the next bullet point actually, so apologies. And that probably isn't just with the target groups we're talking about, giving them a leaflet about a local careers fair. We are probably looking for that more referral, hand-holding for that individual onto opportunities throughout the time that they're working with you. And we will need that to be recorded and evidenced. So just to be aware of that one. It's probably not just, well, we sent all our participants an email. We know for the target groups we're all going to work with for this, that probably wouldn't have much impact. And we want 65% of individuals to progress into the next step of their employability, skills training, education or volunteering journey. I'm going to come back to that one in a moment, because I know there'll be some people on the call thinking, wow, for the target groups we want to work with, that's quite high and that's quite ambitious. So I'm just going to come back to you on that one, because we do understand it's an ambitious target, but I want you to know what support's in place and what we consider some of that to be. And to help with that 100% signposting and that 65% progression, we know that partnerships for that ongoing progression for those individuals are going to be absolutely vital. So I wouldn't expect to see applications in this that wouldn't name any other organisations that they would be working with, and have existing links and thoughts around where these participants might be going and how that might be happening. We're really keen as well with the target groups we're working with, that the right expertise is there to provide that wraparound and holistic support. So it would be wonderful to see in the second call subcontracting with maybe smaller but very specialist organisations who can provide some of that specific expertise around these individuals. So we do want to see lots of partnership and lots of collaboration, and hence our networking event, which will support that to happen. There is no set model for how we want this activity to be delivered, and we want to use the expertise of our voluntary and community groups and their knowledge of the target groups that you choose to engage in your activity to really come through in your application. So we want to give you that creativity and that innovation. But what we do think to achieve these outcomes is we need to set you a kind of a minimum engagement. So we have put that into this funding round, and we would like to see participants engaging regularly, so a minimum probably of 3 times over 3 months. Right, we wouldn't expect to see short one-off activities. They would not be likely to have these outcomes. And we want to see activities which enable participants to make that sufficient progress and build that confidence required. So, you know, once they've left your programme, they've got the maximum opportunity to make those, to take that next step, I think is key here. There are lots of programmes in the first call. I think it's worth saying that it was very individual led against the participant about what they engaged in and what they didn't, and that's fantastic, that individualized approach. But I would say if that's going to be the direction you go in your project, please just be really clear how you're going to track what a minimum engagement is, and what happens to those people who do only participate once, and then you don't see them again. So I think just be clear with us how you see that working, if there is kind of more of a flexible model about how much of an activity an individual takes part in. We've already talked about digital badging, so I won't say that again, but it is a requirement that you would be willing to work with us on the badging process. And something that's really important and why it's great to see Jessie and Maria's faces is they are both part of our hub and spoke model. So an objective but a benefit of the programme especially is to have this additional resource to help our projects to network, to maximise progression opportunities, supporting you with monitoring and evaluation, which is Maria's speciality, and also your claims processes. And Jessie especially is out and about to work with you, help you initiate projects, make the appropriate links. Jessie is going to be sort of arm's length from this funding round, so although she's here today, she won't be involved in evaluating projects, seeing the applications. And the benefit of that is that Jessie can, there is only one of her, and there's quite a few of you, but she is there and she can help to talk about the fund if you think there is an opportunity for Jessie to speak to a group of people or support with bringing together a collaborative around this fund. If you want to work with a specific organisation and you haven't managed to speak to them, Jessie may be able to make those links for you. So you can reach out and use Jessie, and we didn't actually have her in the first funding round, so it's fantastic to see her here as a resource to support. I'll just talk a little bit about the progression, because I know some of you will be sat there thinking that 65% is very high into further training skills, employment and voluntary opportunities for some of the participants we're talking about in this programme. We want to be as flexible as possible, I would say. So just be clear in your application what you think is appropriate as a progression route. There's a little bit of a list here. It's not extensive, but it's some things that we've thought about. So a progression could absolutely be engaging with a further local authority funded one front door service. It could be moving on to DWP funded activity, such as Restart. AEB funded training might be a next step, especially some of the community learning opportunities. NCS and programmes like Future Bright, or even other organisations that support your specific target groups onwards in their progression journey. So for an example, programmes like Prince's Trust. Your targets are our targets, so we're really committed, and that's why we've got especially Jessie there to support and help you to maximise these outcomes. But we do have to be ambitious, so that's why we have set that 65%. Please in your application set out as clearly and plainly as possible what specific activity you will do to really maximise that progression. In the high scoring applications we saw from Core 1, it was really clear what some of those progression routes might be and why those participants would be ready to move on to that programme after their the activity through the Community Support Fund. So please do make that really clear. And we've also put that digital badging in place to really help participants have that acknowledgement of their skills that they've learned whilst they've engaged with you, or just a record of their engagement with you actually in the activity that they've had, so that people can see that commitment and their onward steps. Who do we want to support? So we know we want to support those groups who have been most disproportionately affected in our communities and most furthest from the labour market. So we've already talked about that. And we want to ensure that activity delivered is accessible and really focuses on building confidence of our participants. We know for most target groups we come across, whether that be specific ethnic minority groups or people or disabled people or young people, people with mental health illnesses, that confidence, that issue of confidence keeps coming up again and again. So that's really important part of any programme. And key to this, and Dan Norris, our Metro Mayor, is very keen that this programme supports that onward progression to existing funded projects in our region, and they could be very, very local programmes or they could be national schemes. So that capacity building of what is already funded is really important, and building that resilience within our communities. Those who benefit from the support will be the most vulnerable. So just think about that when you're thinking about the target groups that you are going to choose for your fund. It's probably not enough just to say young people. We'll need to understand how you are supporting those who could most benefit from the fund. You might have individuals with some of these characteristics. So this is not an exhaustive list, but we've set out some of the groups we think that might be targeted through the fund. So people furthest in the labour market, long-term unemployed, but it doesn't have to be exclusively people who aren't employed. So you might have people in low paid positions, underemployment, or those on 0-hour contracts. You might have groups that tend to be unrepresented. So women, young people, specific ethnic minority groups, people with health conditions, disabled people, people over 50, lone parents, those with caring responsibilities, and we could go on, but there's just an example. We have actually lowered the age of the eligibility of participants for this fund down to 15 years old. It was 19 years old in the first call, so that's something to be aware of. And that was because of some of the overwhelming evidence from the initial call about the effects of COVID on young people in our communities, especially kind of on confidence and aspirations and mental health. And we felt we needed to maybe support that at a younger age. And that age of 15 was chosen because we think that's a really key age of transition for young people and narrowing their opportunities, and actually we might be able to catch groups such as pre-NEET if we were to use that age group. But with that brings the risk of us stepping on the toes of local statutory responsibilities for young people. So just be clear, we need to make sure this is above and beyond and not duplicating what's in local areas. That duplication is important for any group, so you need to be able to demonstrate that there is nothing like your programme going on for people in your local area in the way that you are going to run it. We'll go into some details there in a moment. But we can't fund a general expansion of something that's being delivered already. You would need to have to increase the scope or have additional activities or be looking at a different geography or targeting a slightly different target group, bringing together new partnerships, for example. And I've got another slide that sets that out, so I won't go into it in any detail here. It's also really important that I say if we've got people on the call who are delivering already, as part of Call 1, we would really welcome you to think about this Call 2 funding as well. But that would need to add additionality. So again, not just replicating what you're doing already, but how might this fund allow you to work with a slightly different group or to bring in a new partner or a different type of social value activity. And that's an opportunity for people here as well who potentially feel you might not want to be a lead organisation, but you want to be involved, say as a subcontractor or a wider partner. And there might be ways we can link you up into those existing programmes. We are looking for activities which support more or one of the following. So I will just read this out, and this is just to maybe for people who just want some examples of the type of activity we're looking for. You might bring together kind of several elements that are on this slide. So you might support people who have been disproportionately affected by COVID to rebuild. So supporting their life skills, helping them to access the advice, guidance and support that they need and gain the confidence to move closer to employment. You might want to help groups of vulnerable residents and communities across the region to recover, thinking very much about economically and social issues that affected them during the pandemic that will support. Emotional and mental health wellbeing activities, which are actually, I think, a key feature in most of our initial 13 calls, that will help to foster social community cohesion, and that will have a legacy beyond, you know, the recovery of the pandemic, better bringing communities together. We might have activity that reduces barriers to accessing pre-existing adult education available within communities. Adult education budget is a very sustainable fund that we have in the region, 40 million annually. So it's an amazing, and it's on the whole sometimes underutilised. So it'd be great to see some of these projects really feeding in and building capacity and looking at new ways to use that existing funding. Outreach projects or services, either face-to-face or online, which tackle social exclusion. So you may adapt the way that you deliver to support those to feel who are most vulnerable and might be socially isolated to take small steps and progress into something that might be more face-to-face and more engaging with other members of the community. You might promote the current digital entitlement. We know that digital transformation is affecting some of our residents, and some of our residents are digitally excluded in that way, which affects the way that they engage with the community in a massive way and do some, you know, similar very simple tasks of accessing shopping and healthcare and social activities. So there might be something around that. Raise awareness and access to the community around cultural activities, which help again to build strong community links and cohesion. So they're just some ideas, and I would really urge everybody to have a look at the 13 projects, like I said, that we've already funded, that might help you understand what we're funding already, but where some of the gaps might potentially be in the sorts of projects that we haven't funded. Eligibility. So this is really kind of key to remember, especially that change in the age for this fund. So delivery partners, the fund is open to community and voluntary non-profit groups with a track record of achieving positive skills and employability outcomes. The fund is open to any community and voluntary group of any size. Now I know that should maybe have a little kind of asterisk on it, because there still may be, although we've tried really hard, we know there may be some ways that our grant funding legal and financial processes mean that some of you cannot or feel that you cannot apply through this fund. So there's just some key things in the paperwork to check that you can meet, both in terms of obligations, but some of the financial and the due diligence requirements as part of this. And I'd really urge you, if you've got any questions, to ask those questions during the time that the application is open, through the frequently asked questions process that we'll go through at the end, because we will try and support as much as possible, but once applications are closed, we really have to go off the information we've got from those application forms. So I'll say we want to try and engage as many people as possible, whatever your situation, but we can work with you to see if you can be involved. Hope that makes sense and I haven't confused everybody. You can have a base in the West of England Combined Authority geographical area, so Bath and North East Somerset, Bristol or South Gloucestershire local authority areas. but it's not, you know, your headquarters and organisation doesn't have to be within those areas, but you do need to be able to demonstrate some links with local partners and the fact that you understand those local needs. Participants have to be residents of the West of England Combined Authority regions, so just be careful, this fund does not cover North Somerset. Age 15 years or over, and attributed to a target group disproportionately affected by COVID. You can set some of these groups yourselves, but that'll need to be clear in your application what that target group is and why they've been disproportionately affected by COVID. Timeline. So we've launched today. I'm really pleased that we've managed to get the application documents on the website before this call, so you can go and click on that link and they're already there. Doesn't always happen as smoothly as that, so we've managed to do that today. Like I said, what isn't there is the frequently asked questions document that will appear probably early next week. And what isn't there is the link to this recording because we haven't done it yet, but that will also appear on the website as well. Applications close on the 9th of June. You've got all day on the 9th of June, so they close at midnight on that day. Then between the 10th and the 17th, we have a scoring process with an impartial evaluation panel here at the West of England Combined Authority. So scoring and finally moderation will take place. And in the specification guidance, I won't have time to go through all of it today, but there's really clear process of how they will be scored and the scoring methodology and all of that is set out for you in the application document. Due diligence must be completed by Friday the 17th of June. So just to be aware, if we come back to you with extra questions about due diligence, or you're collecting an extra piece of evidence for us that our grants management and assurance team who carry out that due diligence have asked you for, if you cannot get us back to that back to us by the 17th of June, we won't be able to proceed your application to recommend it for funding. So based on the scoring and the moderation that's all set out in the guidance documents, we then put forward projects that we recommend for funding and don't recommend for funding, and that starts going through our governance processes internally. So there are a few governance processes to go through, so they go through 3, and that's why it takes time from the 17th of June to the end of July. That's nothing we can do about that timeline, and that culminates in ultimately our Chief Exec's Officer Group making the final funding decisions. After that, we can let people know, and there might be kind of 3 scenarios really. Either you are successful and we can start issuing you a grant offer letter, initiating your project. You may be unsuccessful, or we may have recommended you for funding, but the evaluation panel has asked that there is some very specific clarifications met, and they would need to be met satisfactorily before we would issue you a grant offer letter. And that's a process which can take as little as a week, and it can take about 2 or 3 weeks. So just to be aware, if your project had some clarifications, it may take a couple of weeks longer, but we are looking to initiate projects at the end of July, beginning of August, with the current timeline, and then we would look for delivery to be completed by March 2023. We appreciate you if delivery is completely finishing at the end of March. You may still have some claims. We'll talk about claims later, but it's in a quarterly in arrears. You may still need the next quarter to put your final claims in as well. So just think about that when you set out your finances. If you think you wouldn't be able to evidence spend by the end of March, that's fine. You can continue your how you set out your spend beyond there if you need to, but it's worth thinking about your project timelines our project timeline that we've got here, we absolutely can't have activity going beyond the end of March 2023 because we have to evaluate the project, have it done and dusted ourselves. By mid-May is when our final evaluation is submitted, and then the team are not funded beyond June. Please don't forget as well in your key milestones to add when you are going to finish the evaluation of your project. It's quite commonly missed off timelines, and it's a key one to add in. We've managed to give you between August and March for delivery. That's actually an extension on the project, and that gives this round of funding the same amount of time to deliver as our Call 1 partners, I should have said. There are some obligations that we require from our applicants and from those who are successful in our funding, and I think it's really really wise to be aware of these obligations and for us to be upfront with these, to see these reflected in your application in terms of appropriate staffing to support your programme, being aware that these are some of the things that are going to be needed to be administered and some of the ways we will need you to work with us as partners in this fund. So there is monitoring, reporting and evaluation activity that we'll require as part of being involved in this fund. That includes identifiable and protected data on participants. So we have gone through a rigorous data process ourselves to get this programme set up, and we will need to sign a data sharing agreement with you, and the data we require you to collect needs to be done in a safe, secure manner, which we're setting up at the moment. So we've got secure systems that we will share with you, and we will need data to be collected and kept safe and secure, and for that data to be collected and for us to check it on a monthly basis. I can tell you that we hadn't decided at the beginning of the first call, but we will only collect a written report off you once a quarter. But we may ask for you to kind of take part in sort of verbal catch-ups with Jessie, especially over the time of the programme. So there is quarterly written reports, but on a monthly basis we want to make sure your data on participants is up to date. So there is that obligation, so just to be clear. Participants will need to use the monitoring and evaluation processes set up by the combined authority. So we've got some very specific things, KPIs that you've already seen, some of our outcomes that we want you to measure, especially those HACT social value measures. And we do want providers to support us in developing case studies on specific participant journeys and experiences, and attending meetings regularly. One of those key meetings is a quarterly stakeholder meeting. There'll only be a few during the time of the programme, but they're only as valuable as how well they are attended and all of that learning that we can share at those stakeholder meetings. So we would expect people to be able to have the staffing capability to attend events now and again. Like I said, they are quarterly. Payment of grant funding will be made in arrears. So I know this might be a challenge for some community and voluntary groups. We've had quite a lot of discussion, I would say, with our grant management and assurance team on this, and there is nothing I can do to move that. There is a tiny shift that we can have for small grants. So small grants, we don't expect we'll have to do this, but if we really have to, we could, and there's very specific justification why this is needed, have an upfront of between 5 to 10% of the cost, which isn't a lot, to be honest, to get you going, but we have managed to negotiate that. So if there's a really strong justification in your application for that, if you're going for a small grant, we can do that. But we do appreciate, we've had lots of discussion with you as a sector about the challenges we face, but it is in line with quite a lot of other grant funding that's available out there, so it is quarterly in arrears. To make sure that's a smooth process, we've got Maria there to support with claims processes especially, and we've just delivered some claims training for our initial partners, and as much support as they need to be able to get that evidence for their claims in place. So that's another thing you need to be aware of, is there is a claims process on a quarterly basis, and again, think of staffing your project appropriately. Applicants must provide additional evidence to support the need for the sorry, I've just lost myself there, to support the need for your initiatives locally. So in section 2, which is quite substantial, of the specification guidance, Jessie and I have provided you with some data around some of the target groups disproportionately affected by COVID. So that's a good place to start, but we would expect in your application that you go a little bit above and beyond with your own specific local knowledge of the types of target groups you're going to support and how you know your type of activity would help them. So that additional evidence is required. Applicants must be clear in their bid how they will ensure 100% of participants are signposted onto skills or employment opportunities, and that's 65% of progression as well. So just make sure it's really, really clear in your application how you're going to do that signposting referral activity, and how you're going to, and with who you're going to support that progression of participants. Please be as specific as you can. We know you need to, we've already talked about the HAP social value measures quite a lot, but that is key for applicants to support us to measure those. And there's a baseline survey for participants and one that they do at the end. And we do want you to be involved in digital badging. I'm going to have to go a little bit faster, I think, with some of this. This slide is really key. I can see people saying, will the slides be shared? I probably won't share the slides, but we will share the film, so you can come back and to this recording and you can flick through. Why I wouldn't share the slides on their own is they haven't got that narrative around them, and they might not make a lot of sense on their own. So I'd say come back to the recording. You can always whiz through to the bit that you want to. Innovation. This is a really important slide here, because there's a specific question about how your programme is different and unique, doesn't duplicate the offer that's already out there. And a top tip from me would be to work through the bullet points on this slide, and this wording is in the specification guidance, and I would answer my question about why my programme was unique based around these bullet points here. So I would be answering the type of, if my programme was unique because of the types of groups and target group I was working with, and how that training had been specifically designed, which is not elsewhere, around to remove those barriers and be inclusive for that particular target group. I would be clear around the types of wraparound care that I'm bringing in and expertise to support that target group to further progress in their skills, training, employment journey. If it was me, I would put out exactly how might be aspects of my programme, but how it was completely new, or how I was bringing very, individual elements might have been delivered before, but how I was bringing those together in a very unique way to create something brand new that had a slightly different scope. You may be targeting participants in new geographical areas, and that would be innovative and new and a different way of delivering a project that might have been delivered elsewhere before. You might have actually tweaked your activity to meet the needs of a new geographical region. New partnerships is a really key one in terms of a unique group of organisations who wouldn't be who haven't been brought together before, and those different ways of engaging. So there might be programmes out there, but they're not reaching your target group because they're not engaging in ways X, Y, and Z to make sure that they're removing barriers for that target group and communicating to them in a way that they understand, in a way that's going to make them engage. And flexible delivery models. So there might be something that exists, but it doesn't support people who have caring responsibilities. So you've designed your delivery in a slightly new way to support that. And I'd really encourage you to look at the initial 13 projects on the website. I would hate for people to come up with something that they thought was really brand new and innovative, only to look at the website halfway through and see there's almost something identical being delivered already through one of the initial funded 13 projects. And if there's not enough detail on there for you, contact Jessie and we can help get you some kind of more details about those projects if you're worried it's going to duplicate something we've funded already. Okay, and this wording around this innovation is in the specification guidance. Very quick note on how you provide that evidence for your target group and that local need above and beyond what's in section 2 of the specification guidance. And I would say there's some really simple ways that I sometimes find delivery partners forget that you have the expertise around working with these target groups, and there's kind of real easy ways to gather some of that intelligence that you already have. So think about your local anchor organisations and networks. You might have extra information on the groups that you want to target that might be above and beyond what you have about those groups. Don't forget that qualitative and anecdotal evidence and trends that you see are also data, as well as some of those raw statistics. Your own delivery data, if you've delivered similar programmes and you've evaluated those in the past, what do they tell you about this target group, which would influence how you would deliver a programme and approach the target group you have. Apologies, it's a little bit noisy outside my window. And there's also some fantastic resources on the combined authority data sources which are available to you. The multiple indices of deprivation guide will help you to use the multiple indices of deprivation data, where you can delve down into deprivation as a whole, but deprivation in specifically employment or finance or health deprivation in very specific areas. And there's a fantastic guide which is very friendly, I would say, to anybody who hasn't looked at that sort of data before. So there's a link there, and it's very usable data which might support. And that is the first question on the application form, is the target group and the need that they've got in your local area that you understand. So we had a fantastic response to the first call in terms of that evidence base, and I know this one will be just as good. So I'll just get into then some of the sort of nitty gritty of the paperwork and the call. Do make sure you have a really good read of everything, I would say. If it was me, that would be the first thing I would do. I would have a good read through all of the documentation. Apologies, there's a lot. Every time we do a funding call, we remember to put an extra thing in, and unfortunately over time what it does do is make it some sort of quite long documents, but actually it's all there to try and support you and to help you not misunderstand anything that we're asking you to do, or not miss out anything that is required for the fund. So it is important, and then having a good read through might help you come up with some initial questions that you might want to put through our FAQ document process. Don't forget to submit everything. There is nothing that's more disappointing than just missing out one piece of documentation, which can be so easy. So there's quite a few on the documentation, kind of almost tick lists for this. So, you know, just keep that really handy, because there's an application form. We need your due diligence response. We need your financial annex. And there's several tabs to fill in on the financial annex, and some fantastic guidance notes that are worth reading before you get stuck in filling that out. And we do need a letter from your Chief Finance Officer. If you're not sure who that can be, I think we've got some frequently asked questions about that from the first call, so I'll make sure we leave those in the FAQ documents when we send those out. Funding is quarterly in arrears. We've already talked about that. This is a revenue project, not capital. So we have managed to negotiate a little bit of funding for equipment. There is a maximum of 8% of your grant amount for equipment, and it will need to be justified in the question around value for money, what you need that equipment for. But, you know, absolutely, if you're running a gardening project and you need some gardening materials, or if you're running a creative project and you need some creative materials, or you are collecting protected characteristics and you need some, say, laptop support to make sure you can do that digitally so it's safe and it's not written down anywhere on your participants, you know, there's absolutely strong justifications for why you would need some equipment other than kind of staff to help you with this fund. Just be aware there is a cap. Make sure you're comfortable with those obligations, and I can't say enough you know, about staffing and making sure there is staffing to support those administration and claims processes and monitoring and data. Milestones and project plans. Just from my experience working with the combined authority so far, they do expect applications to be pretty well thought out, and that changes, there might be small changes but not huge changes to kind of the scope or the milestones or how an activity is going to be delivered. So just not a word of warning, but the more you can have everything set out quite specifically and ready at how your programme would be delivered, and for that to be quite detailed, the better. And because what you don't want to be doing is starting programmes with big change request documents on milestones and things like that. And also on your finances, just be very aware when CEOs sign off a very specific grant amount, that will not be increased in my experience, even by a penny. So what you've put in there, the grant amount, you can obviously ask for less, but it would be very, very challenging for us to go back to CEOs and ask for more. So I think that's worth saying at this point. Make sure if you have questions, you ask them early on. The way our frequently asked questions is going to work is that you will send them through, well, I'll go through it later, but you'll send them through to our skills@ email address. We need to process those. We have to check them with our grant management assurance team. So it takes a couple of days, and then we've got to get them on the website. So if you ask a question, it's not going to be answered the next day. And just keep that in mind if you're leaving this till the last minute. If you send a question in that's vital for your application in the last 2 days of the deadline, the time the applications are open, it might not get answered in time. So just be aware, I would ask as much as you can up front, and that includes any worries or concerns you might have around any of the documents, which is why I say have a good read of them first. If you're worried about the due diligence processes and we appreciate that community and voluntary groups have not got tons of reserves, or you wouldn't be volunteering community non-for-profit groups. So if you've got worries about that, we can address them now. What we can't do is address them once the funding is closed and you haven't put, you know, we can only deal with the information that we've been given at that time. So do be upfront and ask any questions if you've got any worries about that. Make sure there's appropriate expertise in place through partnerships if it can't be yourselves. We are dealing with the most vulnerable people in our communities, and actually there's a chance, isn't there, we could cause more harm than good by delivering activities without the appropriate expertise and level of qualification. So if that involves subcontracting with those who can deliver a very specific element in a specific way, then that's absolutely fine. So make sure that's there. Yeah, and I've already said that, so I'm going to try and move on for time. There's 3 stages to the application process. For those of you who might be involved in the first one, you'll probably be pleased to hear there's not an expression of interest phase. We may regret that in terms of how many applications we might receive and need to evaluate in our week that we've given ourselves. But that's fine, and that'd be great. So there is stage 1, which is a pass or fail, and that's just you ticking the eligibility criteria. So please do not forget to read that carefully. It's the first part of the application form that you have to, there's a box you need to tick. And again, it's you making sure, I won't bring it up because of time, we've got 4 minutes left. But don't forget to tick that. And this first stage is that you've ticked that and you can meet all of those obligations and that and you've passed the due diligence process. That's stage 1, and that's pass or fail. It's, you know, one or the other process. It's not scored. Then the evaluation panel look at scoring questions 1 and 2 using the criteria set out in 3.8.1. in the application documents, and that any scores that are a 1 or below on either of those questions will automatically be excluded from the process and won't be evaluated further. And then any applicants who have scored a 2 or above, between a 2 and a 5 on questions 1 and 2, we will mark the rest of those applications. And there's a lot more detail in terms of that methodology in the paperwork. But of course, any questions, ping them through the FAQs. We'll sort them out for you. I won't go through this in any detail, but there are slight differences in the type of match, additional social value required, and the due diligence required for the different applications. So just make sure you read that carefully and you understand what those differences are, specifically in filling in the right application paperwork. So on the website, there's slightly different application and due diligence process for small grants than there is for medium and large grants. So just be aware of that. So I was going to go through some of the questions here. I might keep people for a few more minutes, but appreciating people have to leave. So I would say come back to the recording and watch the last 5 minutes, because I will just carry on for the purposes of making sure that everybody's got all of the information that you need. So for the rest of this, I'll just go through some of the questions, not all of them. I've skipped a few of the more obvious ones out, but just to give you a few hints and tips on some of the things that we've seen on the high scoring applications from Call 1. So question 1 is all about the target group that you're going to target, or the target groups, and the evidence you've got to understand why they need that support. This was answered fantastically, like I said, in Call 1 by the partners, and people really did go above and beyond, like they were asked to, from the evidence that we provide you in section 2 of the specification guidance. What I would say is where some applications let themselves down was the second part of this question. So don't forget, when you've set out your target audience and how they've been disproportionately affected by COVID, to explain then how your programme is going to be bespoke to be inclusive to that group, to remove barriers for that group, and how you are going to make sure that it's very target group specific, provide them with the support so that they can make that progression towards that next step in their skills, employment or volunteering. So don't forget to, what you know about that group, how you're going to apply that to the design of your programme, basically. And some people did miss out the second part of that in their answer from some of the first ones, which was a shame. This second part of question 1 is around giving an overview of your programme. Please be succinct. This is your opportunity to paint a visual picture for the evaluation panel in a really succinct and simple way of what activities you're going to deliver, how your activities will be delivered, where your activities are going to take place, the content of that activity, how long that's going to happen for. What's really frustrating for an evaluation panel is when they just gonna pause there. I think somebody's turned the microphone off. It's fine. What's really frustrating for evaluation panel is when it's really confusing what an activity actually is, or what type of experience exactly a participant is going to have, and the type of journey they're going to have through. I think there's somebody with their microphone on. Would they just be able to turn that off? If I can just find out who they are to mute them. No, can't see who they are, but they've stopped, so I'll carry on. Yes, I was just saying there's nothing more frustrating to evaluation panel when it's really hard and you're trying to piece together, because it's not clear what that journey is for that participant or exactly what is on offer and what they're going to be involved in. So do try and make that one really well clear and succinct is a message, I would say, through all of it. The other point I would make, some of you might go through the application form and say, wow, there's maximum 1,000 words on some of these. less is more sometimes, I would say. So they are just, the word count is a max, and it's there for people who really do feel they need to use it. We would hate for people to feel they've run out of space, but by no means feel you have to fill up all of that wording. We're expecting quite a few applications, so the evaluation panel is really going to thank you for the more succinct, specific but succinct answers that you can provide on this fund, I would say, all of these questions. And like I say, I'm skipping a little bit because I haven't put everything on here, but I wanted to talk about this 1D because that is where it would be, it'd really be nice if you could potentially use that slide that I said before and those unique aspects of your programme to really set out clearly what is different and what is unique. And I'll just come back to that slide. So it's that slide about innovation and what is different and what aspects, whether it's geography or slightly new scope or a different target audience or different partnerships or bringing together a new programme that's more flexible than you've delivered it before, is really, really important. Question 2 is all around how you will support the transition of those who complete activity towards that further progression, and you've got those targets set out for you again here. So it's really important for us to understand how this process will be managed so that you can meet those targets. So it's the how and with who, and I would say please try not to keep your progression targets narrow. You're going to have people who are developing different types of skills with you, but they might have lots of different types of interests. So they might not all want to go into the same voluntary opportunity, or they might not all want to go into the health and social care sector and look at those progression routes. So do think about the differences and some of the different places those people will go. But the more specific you can be about where you think your participants will be at the end of their journey with you and what will be an appropriate onward journey, that would be really, really helpful for us to understand in that question. The second part of question 2 is about the hacked social value measures and the social value themes that your activity is going to deliver. Just to reassure you, there is a link in the specification guidance to the hacked documents, and by all means you can go and make yourself an expert on them, but we don't expect you to. So just to be reassuring, for this question, what we're looking for is for you to be able to pick out the different types of social value that you're going to deliver and explain how your programme is going to deliver those different elements. And again, if it was me, and to make it easy for an evaluation panel, I would probably put a subheading of the different themes that were relevant, and I would put the different types of activities and list out specifically how and where in my programme they were going to be delivered, and maybe what exactly those participants are going to achieve. If it's health and wellbeing, a 3-month programme might not completely make a mental health issue disappear from a participant, but what might they have gained in terms of their work with you, and where might they be at? This question 2B, would you expect to achieve any of the social value activity if you hadn't got the fund? Again, there was a mixed response to this in call 1 about how well this was funded, and I would say be really honest. If there are elements of this programme that you can achieve through other funding sources, that's absolutely fine. It probably won't count against you. It's what does this allow you to do? What are those other extra aspects that you can pull together that really make this unique, and you would not be able to deliver those outcomes without this fund. So try to be as clear as you can here about what could be achieved or what definitely couldn't be achieved without this funding. Question 3, so we go on to talk about, and I am aware of the time, so I am going to try and finish at 10 past. This is all about your experience and expertise, and this is where it would be really nice to understand, especially if there's partnerships, what those different partnerships are bringing and where that expertise is. I think I said earlier on, we've potentially got target groups here who are quite vulnerable in our communities. So how are we going to make sure that they're is the appropriate level of expertise, policy, safeguarding, to make sure our participants are safe and they have a really high quality journey with you. And that's where sort of talking about the expertise of your different partners and people you might link with in this programme would be key. Question 4 is about, there's a whole section before this which includes the financial annex, and it asks you about your targets and the types of hack social value and some of the more numbers about your participant numbers and how many you expect to progress and complete. And then this part of the question in question 4 is asking you to justify some of those. And again, I would really urge you to work through the bullet points in this additional guidance here. I know it sounds obvious, but it's there to really help guide you in terms of what the evaluation panel want to hear. It was really reassuring in high scoring applications in the first call for people who could look at past funding for similar types of projects and be able to kind of benchmark where their activity was against other types of funding that they've delivered, and they might have added on elements, so added on kind of market rate costs for some of those activities. That was really helpful where people had been able to compare it to comparable programmes, which I know is quite difficult for this type of delivery. If you are requesting any type of equipment, which is a maximum up to 8% of that grant amount, please do justify it here and explain why you need it. It's probably quite obvious, but do put that in. And for small grants, if you are requiring a small amount up front, you really need to justify here why that's absolutely necessary to support you in this question. Got 1 minute left, so I'm going to go quite quickly. Question 5, there's not much to say really, apart from a well thought out risk register would really put you in good stead. Sometimes it seems as if this is the last thing that somebody's filled in is their risk register, but actually if you've really thought about some of the things that could go wrong and some of the ways you're going to mitigate that, it really does show the expertise of that applicant in delivering programs like this and recognising where some of the pinch points and some of the issues might occur. So it's quite telling actually, the risk register and the likelihood and the impact of groups that really understand where things might go wrong and where they might need to kind of look at preventing that as much as they can. And don't forget on your key milestones to add when you're going to complete your final evaluation, because people often miss it off. So that's probably the only thing to say about that one. And it is, again, really important for us to understand how you're going to evaluate the programme. We're going to give you some tools to do that, but understanding what you might plan to do, when you might do case studies, if you might add it to some type of evaluation that you like to do when you're running these types of programmes. Again, the more specific you can be about when in your programme you see some of that happening, the better. And the social value question, these are slightly different between the different size grants, so they're slightly different for the small grants compared to the medium and large. So it's not compulsory actually for small projects to have social value, but they will be small and medium, but you will lose out on your 5% if you don't offer some. And please don't get additional social value mixed up with the social value of the programme. I know it's confusing. But additional to help you, we really want you as organisations to use your expertise, and there's some ideas there of ways you might support the wider programme rather than trying to pick out more random types of social value, let's say, that some people add to their application form. So do have a good read of that, and I think you'll easily then be able to add some detail about how you might be able to help in an additional way. Next steps then, because I am very late and some of you have probably had to leave. Application paperwork is on the website. It's been put in the link, but if you Google West of England Combined Authority Community Support Fund, it will no doubt come up and be there for you as well. This is slightly wrong. There is no expression of interest phase. I should have deleted that. All applications need to be in. There is one phase by the 9th of June, by midnight on that day. So you do have all day on that 9th of June as well. We've tried to be as generous as we can with the timeline, knowing there's some bank holidays, but we absolutely could not stretch it anymore. We welcome questions and we can support you at this stage. We cannot support you once your application is in and it's closed. So please send questions to skills at West of England Combined Authority, put CSF call 2 application in the title, and we will update that FAQ document. You also submit your final application there, but there is guidelines in the application documentation, but that's the same email address and that's the same title of your email that you add to submit your application. We would love to see as many of you as possible at our facilitated networking event next Thursday at Eastern Community Centre, 10 to 11:30. The Eventbrite for that, which you must sign up to come so that you get the details, is on the website, the same as the application documents, is all there. And our regional outreach officer is a busy lady, but she is there to outreach and support, and she'll do as much as she can during the time that this funding round is open. She's not compromised because she's not going to be involved in the evaluation or seeing any of your applications or any part of the scoring or deciding who gets funded. So she's absolutely removed from that and can therefore speak to groups and help talk to you about some of those high quality application aspects and things like that. So her email address is there, or if you miss it, if you email anything at skills@westofenglandca.gov.uk, we'll be able to direct you to the right person anyway. And I will leave it there because I'm well over time, but you never know how long these things are going to take. Fantastic to see so many of you today. If you've got colleagues or networks who you know want to see this video, it will appear on our website very shortly, probably early next week, in terms of a link. Thank you very much.